Hello and welcome to this Everyday Challenges presentation. My name's Susan and I'm one of the occupational therapists here in Highland.
And I'm Jackie, one of the occupational therapists here in Highland too.
We're going to share with you today our Everyday Challenges presentation. Originally we arranged this as a 3-hour interactive workshop. Today for you we're going to condense this down into a 1-hour presentation and we hope to capture a flavour of those workshops to share with you today. So, before we begin, just to have a little think, as I've said, this is an interactive presentation and generally I find you get out of these things what you put into them. So we have suggested some items that you require to enhance this learning experience, and we've got a list here for you just to check off. We're suggesting that you have a timer of some sort, whether that be an actual timer or your phone. We also ask that you have an item of clothing, whether it be a cardigan, a shirt or a jacket with buttons or a zip on it, to demonstrate some dressing skills. We're also asking that if you have one, a small baby doll with clothes for dressing as well. We're looking for to look at cutlery skills. We need you to have a knife and a fork and some playdoh, so have a rummage around and see what you can find. And also to demonstrate our pencil skills, we're looking for you to have a pencil and paper. So it would be really helpful if you need to pause and find those first of all, or if you have those items to hand, that would be super, because we're going to be visiting those through the course of this presentation. If we think a little bit about our objectives for today, we're remembering that this Everyday Challenges presentation can cover a broad spectrum of conditions. We work with children who perhaps have coordination difficulties, so they may have a developmental coordination disorder, they may have an autism spectrum condition, they may have attention deficit challenges, they may have Down syndrome, or they may have an unlabelled condition which manifests itself in them finding everyday activities a little bit trickier. And that is the essence of this workshop, sharing with you some hints and tips to manage those situations. Our objectives really, we want you to leave with something to try. We want to flick some switches in your brains, make you think a little bit and see what you can do to make life easier for the children and young people that you may be working with. The big question I always get asked, what is occupational therapy? The clue's in the name. We look at everyday activities, but as occupational therapists, we refer to those as occupations. So all those everyday things, whether it be getting dressed, brushing your teeth, going to school, all of those are your everyday activities and those are your occupations. And our job as occupational therapists is to focus on how we might enable our children and young people to engage with those activities to the best of their ability and to enable them to reach their full potential. I'm going to hand over to Jackie now because we're going to get busy and be a little bit interactive.
Okay, what I would like you to think about is the occupations that you do every day, thinking back to yesterday, and I'd like you just to take approximately a minute to think about all the occupations that you did, all the activities that you did from the point that you got up in the morning to the point that you went to bed. What I'd then like you to do is have a think about whether there were any challenges with that or whether they all went swimmingly well, and if they were challenging, why that might be. So what I would like you to do is pause the film just at this point and take 4 or 5 minutes to do that.
Usually when we've done this as a workshop, there's been lots of chat in the room, lots of chat between each other and lots of thinking. So it's always a good indication that everybody absolutely knows what an occupation is, because we've all busy lives and they're all really full. Lots of things happening day to day. Some things that we expect, some things are unanticipated and kind of come in from left of field. If we look at this slide here, these are the kind of I suppose the kind of occupations and challenges that some of the children and families that we work with face on a day-to-day basis. And you'll see from the slide there, it's a really broad stroke of different things, whether it be a personal care activity with things like brushing your teeth or taking a bath. It could be a bigger sort of daily routine, things like your bedtime routine, or perhaps getting changed for bed or getting dressed first thing in the morning. But again, it's a huge range of activities. As occupational therapists here in Highland, our team get requests for a broad range of difficulties, and we've listed a few there for you. Sometimes it can be that whole morning routine thing, getting dressed. Sometimes it can be the challenges of being in the dining room at lunchtime, or it could be how you cope with that unstructured time at lunchtime or break time. Some of the children that we work with have coordination difficulties or attention difficulties, so things that require a great deal of coordination and focus. For example, riding a bike can be really challenging too. Equally, we get a lot of requests for children who find personal care activities challenging, whether that be a bath or a shower, and how best we can help support that. And then there are those every now and again sort of opportunities, things like popping out to the shops or having to go to a medical appointment or something that generally isn't part of that normal routine. So hopefully through progressing through this workshop this morning, we'll give you a few points and tips on how to help manage those situations a little bit more effectively. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, we're going to think about why these activities might be challenging for our children and young people. If we start at the top and work our way down, if we think about the activity itself, it could be something that is new or unfamiliar. It might be too complicated for them. It might have too many steps. It's just too overwhelming. Or, in fact, for a lot of us, it just might not be motivating. We might just not be that interested in doing it. So the activity itself can hold a whole load of information for us when we're trying to unpick why that activity is challenging. If we think about the environment, we might be doing the activity in a new or unfamiliar environment, so there's lots of things that we've got to understand about it before we can focus on the activity that I'm asking you to do. It could be too noisy. Some children, it could be the reverse. It might be too quiet an environment for them, or it could just be too distracting. Equally, it could be that the room that you're working in might be too hot. At the moment, we're in the middle of a glorious Scottish summer and it's really warm outside. You would suggest that perhaps gym lessons might be best off out there, but actually it's just too hot, so you're better off in the building as well. So thinking about that environment in its broadest sense as well. And then we come back down to the child, and very often this for a lot of people is the starting point, but for us as occupational therapists, we're looking at that much bigger picture, but not taking away obviously the contribution of how this impacts on the child themselves. So they could be unwell, they might be brewing a bug or a cold or what have you. They could equally just be tired. We're coming now towards the end of the school year. Everyone's kind of flagging a little bit, so there could be a whole manner of reasons why that activity on that particular day is challenging for them. They could be overwhelmed by a really, really busy day, and this could be just one extra demand that you're placing on them, and it's just one step too far for them. Or equally, they may not have the motor skills required to undertake that activity as well. It might just be too fiddly, too footery for them, and they just can't do it. As occupational therapists, we're looking at those three spheres and how they kind of mesh together, and it's that little bit in the middle where you often get that nub of knowledge as to what it is that's causing the issue for the child. Okay, we're going to move on to another activity, so I'll hand over to Jackie and she'll talk you through what we're going to do.
Okay, so if we're thinking about activities, challenge one is about analysing the activities you're doing and what makes them more difficult or what makes them more straightforward. There are two options for the activities. The first option is for those of you who are on your own and are not in a group situation, and the second option is for people who are sitting with others and have an opportunity to discuss with others. So if you're choosing option one, what we'd like you to do is get the jacket or cardigan or item of clothing that you gathered at the beginning, and I would like you to put the jacket on and fasten it. Option two, we would like you to choose an activity from the gathered resources that you got at the beginning. If there's more than just a few of you, you may want to split into several groups so that you can experience some of the different activities. And if you're in a group situation, what we'd like you to do is have one person describe to the others what you would like them to do, but without using any visual demonstrations. It's all based on words. So if you're in option 2, for example, you might want to use the cutlery to cut up Play-Doh. You might want to use your pencil and paper to write 3 complicated words of the descriptor's choice. So longer words such as yesterday or tomorrow or Saturday. Or you might want to dress the baby. If you're doing the writing activity, I should have said, is if you use your non-dominant hand. Okay, so for the first part of the task, if you take approximately 5 minutes to do the doing bit of the task, and then take approximately 5 minutes to discuss with your other group members or to think to yourself if you're on your own just how easy or difficult the task was, and actually if there's anything else that would make that task easier. So if you want to pause the film now and come back in after approximately 10 minutes.
Okay, so hopefully that activity has generated lots of thoughts and lots of discussion if you've got some buddies around with you. When we do these in workshops, it's amazing just how much people kind of stop and reflect on all the things that we do as adults automatically, and revisiting how it was when they learned that activity first of all. And I think things like using cutlery, getting dressed and using a pencil are all the things that we ask the children to do from a very early stage. So how we acquire those skills is a really long and it is a long process, but we have to realise that there are other factors at play within that as well. As occupational therapists, when we're looking at all those different activities and breaking them down into their little stages, one of the things that we're looking for is what we refer to as the just right challenge. So it's the activity and the level that we're pitching at it at is just at that right level. It's not too hard, not too easy. It's a bit of a Goldilocks moment. It's just got to be right for them. And if we get that right, then we get the motivation and then that whole learning process flows a little bit more easily. Again, as you were doing that, when you're thinking about how many steps there are to putting on your jacket or how many steps there are in cutting something up, if we've got a jacket or a cardigan with really complicated fastening, we can understand why sometimes a child might disengage really quickly. Some of these fabulous winter coats might have a zip and Velcro, and so by the time you've fathomed and faffed about with all of that, I'm just really not that interested in putting my jacket on, I'll just go out without it. So you can see why they would disengage, or it might then become a bit of a challenge for them. So thinking about how complex and demanding it is, and also what are their past experiences of that activity as well. If we're thinking about past experience, sometimes I think this is quite a key one. If you've had a negative experience, you know, from your own sort of day-to-day occurrences, if you do something and you have a really, and something doesn't quite go right, it can knock your confidence, and you can kind of think, well, actually, do you know what, I'm not going to do that again. But if you're able to kind of enhance that in some way, then you can keep moving forward with it. And I suppose as well, are you asking the child to do an activity that their skill set matches? If you ask them to do an activity that's too complicated, they're not going to progress with it. It's going to be much harder. So for example, in schools, if you've been doing a block of gymnastics for, 4 or 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden you switch to basketball, oh my goodness, what happens then? You've suddenly gone from this child who's kind of managed to do everything that you've needed to do because it's just been them having to assume different positions and do a role or what have you, to then suddenly having to work with a ball as well. So they're having to organise themselves, organise this ball, and then you've got this really fast moving game round and about them as well. So there are lots and lots of steps in that can make it really hard. So by picking through these key points, hopefully you can start to unpick where the challenge kind of lies. We had a little beginning to think about what things might make it easier. So that whole thing of breaking it down, and I think as OTs, when we do our activity analysis, that's one of our kind of core skills really, and that's what we're hoping to share with you. breaking it down, giving those instructions step by step. What is it you need to do? I need you to do this, and then this, and then this, and make sure there's a flow in it. We've popped up there one of our goal, plan, do checklists, which we found really useful with young children. I've used them a lot with older children in primary and in high school as well, successfully too. But you'll see there's an element where you have a think about what your goal is, what's your plan to achieve it, you go ahead and have a try with it, and then you have a think and see, did it work, or what can I change, what would make it better. That is useful to kind of just have as a little plan in your head as well when you're working with a child. Some of you may be familiar with backward chaining. We find that works particularly helpfully with things like dressing skills. So, for example, if we're thinking about that zip, you may be looking to develop those independent dressing skills. You may have the child with their jacket on and they're simply pulling the zip up from sort of mid-chest up to their neck, or you may then progress on from sort of their tummy to their neck, and then you might start with an adult holding the bottom of the zip and the child puts it in, and so on, and you gradually pull back so that they're doing more and more of the task themselves. It's a really useful technique that can be applied in so many situations. But as I say, it is a really helpful one to do. And also that whole thing of simplifying the task as well. You might have visuals to support that activity as well, which can be helpful too. And that also is part of that modification and adapting the task also. So when you're using cutlery skills, you may only be cutting one item on the plate rather than expecting the child to cut up absolutely everything that's on the plate. So it's just thinking about it. And we've got at the bottom there, having a go. And I think sometimes a lot of it is about just being bold and trying it. There's no right, there's no wrong, but something has to change, and it's just having the courage to have a go and to make a change. And very often we find a lot of the most creative and innovative results are from parents and PSAs and class teachers who've just actually done that very thing, just had a go and see how they get on. Okay. What do you need to do the activity? Well, from the slide, hopefully you can tell what we feel is one of the biggest factors in there, and that's you. You are the one person that can control yourself. You can control your own behaviour, you can control how you engage with someone, how far away you are from them, how close you sit to them, how the pitch of your voice. You can modify your response to whatever situation. If we think back to that child activity and environment, in all of that, the thing that's easiest to control is yourself. So that is a really, really big one to remember in there. We've also jotted down a few other things. Time is one of those things there. An expectation of what's to be done in an allotted time. Sometimes the children and young people that we work with get a bit overwhelmed by, we've got 20 minutes to complete this activity, and if they don't get that activity completed, it can be quite upsetting for them. And again, that's when you might get that challenge kind of kicking in for them. So it's being realistic about what it is that you're asking them to do and how you're asking them to do it. So the use of a timer, or perhaps agreeing how much of the activity is to be completed, those kind of things help too. And those rules and expectations for the activity, just so long as they're explicit and in a format that works best for the child. You'll know the child best because you're working with them day to day, either at home, they're your child and you see them 24 hours a day, or within the school environment. And that's how you'll know what suits them best as well. So, as I say, a few things there to think about. We're going to move on now and do another challenge, another activity for you, and I'm going to let Jackie explain that to you.
Moving on to challenge 2, which is actually doing an activity that is actually new or unfamiliar to you. We take for granted the things that we do every day because they are well practiced and we know exactly what's involved and we know how to prepare for them. What is challenging for a number of our children and young people is actually when you give them a new experience or when you change something in an activity that they already think they know. So for your activity just now, taking approximately 10 minutes, what we'd like you to do is, using your pen and paper, is write down using your non-dominant hand any day of the week using the font that I will put up in a minute. Again, as per the first challenge, is what we'd like you to do is take about 5 minutes to do the doing bit, and then take approximately 5 minutes to have a think about how easy or difficult the task was, and is there anything that would have made that easier. Okay, this is your alphabet, and I would like you to pause the film just at this point, and you will come back in with Susan.
Hopefully, participating in that last activity is giving you a little feel for the challenges that sometimes some of our children feel. When Jackie said to you, we're going to do a handwriting activity, you probably thought, right, I can do that. When she asked you to do it with your other hand, that little voice in your head might be saying, oh, okay, yeah, I can still do that. And then when she said, and I want you to use this font, then, those goalposts start shifting more and more. And perhaps you might have noticed for yourself, that little inner bubble of something in your tummy sort of thinking, oh my goodness, right, I'm going to give this my best shot, but I don't know if it's going to be any good. You might have felt your arm tensing a little bit as you were trying to make it go. I know how to do these letters, but this hand just doesn't want to go where I want it to go. And equally, you might have been a bit more fidgety in your seat than normal because actually you're, how am I going to do this? So all of those things, it was a really subtle illustration of what our children kind of face day to day when we're throwing lots and lots of new experiences, new and familiar experiences, but they still have that little challenge element in it. So hopefully you found that really a helpful experience to try that one, and well done if you stuck with it to the end. No cheating. So we've put on the next slide what might help. So we talk a lot about homework in schools. We also talk about pre-work, so it's that kind of preparatory work for doing an activity. If you know you're going to be introducing something new, or you know that you might be doing it in a different space, preparing that child for what that change might look like. Simplifying things down, using visuals to help with understanding, using equipment and timers. And we've got a selection here that we'll show you to have a look at. Sometimes using a timer as a visual representation of how long an activity is going to last, or when you're going to come back and check how things are with the child, that can help as well. And those clear rules and expectations again. One of the things that we have got here on the next two slides is what we refer to as our prompt sheet. And we generally we've split it into two slides for the purposes of this presentation, but we generally have it on an A4 sheet. And that can be a really useful tool for you to have, just to think about, are they understanding what I'm asking them to do? How long is this going to be too long, too complicated for them? Have they got the skills required to do the task? And are they able to deal with all of the sensations? It's a warm room, it's a busy classroom, I'm ready for my lunch, I'm feeling a bit hungry, all of those kind of things as well. So that again can be another really useful tool, just to kind of dip in and out of if you're finding you're presented with a situation that's slightly more challenging. A little revisit through some of those can help as well. Okay, we're going to move it on again. Other ways that you might be able to help the child or young person that you're working with is things like checking for their understanding. Ask them to tell you back your instruction. Have they got what it is that you're asking them to do? Make sure, I think for all of us, if we feel potentially overwhelmed, it's quite good if somebody is able to read that sign, or to know and sort of say, do you want to take 2 minutes? Do you want to just have a little movement break? Do you want to can you take this note to the office, or whatever it is? So if you've got some kind of buddy system or secret signal that you can convey that, then that can work really well too. And also there's the possibility of working on skills away from the activity. So one of the things that we sometimes suggest is when you're working on your cutlery skills, you might want to try practicing cutting up. Quite often our children can manage spearing and using a spoon from an early stage, but cutting with a knife and fork is a more refined task. So we might suggest using some playdoh, as you did earlier, to practice those cutting skills, and then transferring it onto sort of food items at meal times as and when. Equally, we're aware that sometimes some children can be quite literal in their thinking, and we've got experience of some children who, if you practice cutlery skills with Play-Doh, will only use the cutlery with Play-Doh. So when it comes to meal times, you're back where you started again. So just be mindful of the little quirks that some of your children may have as well. Equally, you may, if we're working on skills away from the activity, you may choose to work on balance skills away from riding a bike. So you may do a whole load of sort of trim trail things, or work in the play park on the climbing frame and things like that as well. And then you can transfer those skills over to the activity that you're going to do. In the next slide, we talk about motivation and attention. And we know that all of those are both linked to learning and understanding. And in order to have success, we need to motivate, and we need to have that attention to be able to pursue the task as well. So be aware again. Equally, we recognise that when you're busy concentrating, if we think back to that handwriting activity that you just did, I'm sure you were all pretty glad when the time came to finish, when you'd finished the end of that word. Time-out breaks are beneficial for lots of children, right across the board. So whether it's a quiet, chilled out space that's kind of recognised in the classroom, whether it be the library corner or the bean bags, wherever they may be, or whether there's just a quiet corner in the house, or maybe that's their bedroom, that might be their quiet place. But also recognising, as well as being quiet, the opportunity for movement and exercise can be really helpful too, and any opportunity is great. Any opportunity for movement is perfect, but it's often better if it's linked to a task. So if you have got to take that note to the office, or you are going to help to stack the chairs at the end of the day, or you're going to help mum carry the groceries in from the car, or what have you as well. If you remember that 1 minute that we did at the very, very start, when Jackie asked you to think about yesterday and all the everyday activities that you'd done then, that 1 minute probably, when you were sitting in a focused time, felt like a really long period of time. So just recall the value of just saying, okay everybody, we're just going to pause for 1 minute, and that sometimes is just enough to give everybody the opportunity to regroup and to get their focus back in again. It can work for you in lots of different ways, but that's always my golden ticket. Just remember that 1 minute. As occupational therapists, we're aware that children process information in different ways. They may process all those sensations differently. All that information from our senses gets interpreted in the brain in a slightly different way. And remember also, here on the table we've got for you a few of our concentrators. So there can be concentrators for the mouth and concentrators for the hands as well. That can also just help retain that attention and focus and motivation. And we've also got a lap cushion there for you to look at too. I've mentioned briefly there the senses. This is just a little recap. We talk about this in some of our other training around the 8 sensory systems that we kind of can support and share our understanding with as well. And there's just a little slide there to inform you of those. So that's been a big chunk of information to think about again. We are going to have another challenge because we know you love them so much. Jackie's going to share with you challenge number 3.
Okay, as Susan said, we're now moving on to challenge number 3. For this one, the next few slides through the presentation are a series of different photographs. What I'd like you to do is look at them either individually or as in your groups. Imagine that you are actually there in the here and now. What do you see when you go there? Having a think about also what our young people and children might also see when they go into those environments. Have a think about how much of what you see is needed for the activity, and actually how much of that do you filter out. But it's also worth, although it's not mentioned on the slide, is actually having a think about what actually might help make that environment better. Okay, so looking at the first picture, this is a fairly typical classroom in some schools, and for some children they would absolutely love the hustle and bustle and colour and busyness. But for some of our children and young people, actually, this is actually really quite difficult and challenging. It's too busy, there's too much going on, it's probably too very noisy. They don't know necessarily what instruments they need to pick up from the table, and even if they do manage to find the right thing to use, they might actually not know how to use it. Some children like to sit. This looks like it might be more of a sort of standing activity. And even just simple day-to-day things like putting on an apron actually could be really challenging. You might not like the fabric, you might not be able to tie the tire. So that could be really difficult, and it's worth always thinking about how do you reduce that visual stimulation, how do you reduce the chaotic type nature that some classes like this might feel to some children. Okay, so picture number 2. Well, it's a bit better because actually you've got your group, they've all got a very designated place to sit. The teacher has somewhere to sit and the children are all looking towards that teacher and able to engage and work out with the teacher what they're expected to do. Okay, so for some children though, sitting in a circle like that and they're being very close to others actually might be hugely challenging, and if they have need to escape, they cannot get out of that circle, which again then leads to these difficult behaviours at times. Okay, picture number 3. For most of you who are parents, this is probably a fairly typical scene in your house. Bedrooms that are full of colour and clutter and mess. Now for some children you ask them if they can find something in it, actually they can tell you exactly where it is at any given time. For lots of our children and young people, actually that is not the calm and restful and organised space that they need to be able to function more effectively. It's very cluttered, so things like putting labels on things or visual pictures can really help. But also you'll see in that picture there are 2 beds. If you have a child who actually is sleeping on their own in there, again if you say to them to go to bed, for some of them that literalness is actually they won't know which bed to go to. So again it's about reducing the clutter, making it easier for the child to function in that room, and if they only need 1 bed, then they only have 1 bed. Okay, the next one is kind of days where you have unexpected special events such as Halloween or Christmas or sports days. All of these things can be hugely challenging because they are different to the norm. People wear different things, they look differently, you do different activities, and that can be hugely stressful, particularly if you're quite rigid in your thinking. And for example, in this picture, which is Halloween, if you're very rigid and you're thinking actually a pumpkin is something you eat, but in this picture you've got lots of people running around dressed as pumpkins, so actually is that anxiety provoking? It could be frightening, it could be very, very confusing for that young person. And in the last picture is more and more schools and environments have got an outdoor learning environment which tends to be a bit quieter, which can be nice. In this picture particularly, depending on who is going to be the king or queen for the day in the throne, usually probably your teacher or your parent or something, is that your children are able to look towards that person, but actually they're able to get out as well. And often now in our playgrounds and learning environments, this is that these kind of spaces are being used by our young people at playtimes when things are becoming a bit difficult for them, so that they have that natural area to break out. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Susan.
Okay, hopefully that last exercise has added another layer of our knowledge from this Everyday Challenges presentation. We're almost there. We've only got a few more slides left to look through together. So hang on in there, you're doing great. This next one looks at the adult in the equation. So if you remember, we talked about the activity, the child and the environment. You are part of that environment, and in a previous slide we spoke about how the importance of you and how much influence you can exert over a situation by what you can control within yourself. This slide here just captures a few more elements that you may wish to consider. So thinking about your movement. Perhaps maybe you're a kind of really dynamic person that leaps and jumps around. Sometimes that's a bit too much for some kids. They might perhaps prefer someone who just kind of comes in and sits quietly behind them. Thinking about the tone of your voice. I guess if you're maybe a high school teacher, you're having to project your voice to the back of the classroom. Some children might find that a little upsetting. So moving yourself to the back of the classroom to have that conversation and then coming back round or what have you. Lots of different ways that you can tweak these things to make it work for you. As well, we've got down there, clothing, colour and pattern. Today I'm wearing quite a busy sort of pattern on my blouse. If I was going out to visit someone, I might dampen that down with perhaps a plain cardigan on top, a navy cardigan or something, and that would just shut off a lot of this busyness. Equally, the other one we have there that sometimes people aren't really aware of is sort of those personal smells, so things like deodorant or perfume, or maybe you suck a mint or chew gum or what have you. Some of our kids can be really tuned into that, and that can be a little bit off-putting for them as well. We had experience with a PSA who was working with a child, and they had a fabulous relationship and things were going really well, and activities were going well, and then she'd come back after a holiday, a break in the school term, and things just weren't quite the same, and when we looked at that environment, activity and child thing, the thing that had changed had been her shower gel. And it was just that thing, because everything else was the same. So it's being mindful that sometimes it can be the smallest of things that can kind of have quite a big impact as well. So you can have a look at those things, take them at your leisure and have a think on it, but it's just things to be aware of within that. Equally, things you may wish to consider with the child. Again, there's lots of information on that slide. I'll let you look at that at your leisure too. But a couple of things just to pick out. One there, I find riding a bike tricky. That could be for a whole manner of reasons. It could be that they don't have the motor skills. It could be that they've not got the attention. It could be that actually, do you know what? Although my sister and my brother ride a bike, I'm really not that fussy for riding a bike. It's not motivating to me. I'd much rather be kicking a football. So working out all of those kind of things. The one at the bottom there, I take a long time to get dressed. It could be that, being organised, being able to follow a sequence to know that my pants and vest go on before my trousers, or I pull my trousers on and my pants are still sitting on the bed. Oh my goodness, something went wrong there. What is that sequence? What do I need to do? It could be that actually you don't like the feel of your clothes, so actually getting dressed, I only have my, the one pair of trousers that I really like, or that polo shirt that I really, really like. And actually, weekends are much better because I don't have to wear that ghastly school uniform at all. And finally on this slide, I don't like sitting for too long. We've got a little picture here of one of our move and sit cushions. Some of our children with attention difficulties, some of our kids who aren't quite sure of where their body is in space, find sitting on one of those little cushions quite helpful. It can help with their concentration, it can help with their ability to engage in activities for a longer period. They can be used on the floor, they can be used on a classroom chair as well, so they're quite flexible in that approach too. So there are a few things, other things there on that slide that I'll let you have a look at your leisure too. Okay, so we're starting our conclusion now really. What might help in home and school? We are just thinking about that noise level. We've spoken about it already, so just be aware. Is it too busy? Is it not busy enough? Is it too noisy? Is it not quiet enough for them? Avoiding too much visual clutter, thinking back to that picture of the bedroom where, boom, it was like a scattergun in there with everything everywhere. Simplifying things down. In the classroom, often we suggest, having one wall that's blank so that there's nothing visually stimulating in that space. We've spoken about the quiet chill out space. Getting the child or young person to organise wherever you are in a way that suits them so that they feel comfortable and in control and are able to engage in whatever activity you present in that is really important too. Asking the child what might help. They might have the answer and they say, actually, do you know what? I really don't like sitting over there because it's too sunny. I prefer being over there because it's a bit quieter and I'm away from the door. They might have the solution themselves. Some of our children, might show you rather than tell you. So there are lots of ways of accessing that information. And also speaking with each other, speaking to mums and dads and grannies and childminders, speaking to the school staff, speaking to occupational therapists and other professionals that are visiting. Together we can build that bigger picture of what might help. Involving the child and their family with those plans and pulling something together so that there's consistency at home and at school as well can work. And that bottom one there, we've touched on it earlier, that trial and error, give it a go. You don't know unless you try, and sometimes it's just that one little thing that can make a big old difference with all of that too. That is the end of our Everyday Challenges presentation. Thank you so very much for your, I'm sure, enthusiastic participation at your end. If you have any questions, please do feel free to contact your local occupational therapist. We've also added in our departmental email address that we would be happy to, if you felt you wanted to follow up anything from this. But thank you for your enthusiastic participation, and we've enjoyed sharing this time with you. Thank you.